October 28th, 1944. Near Lunéville, France. Oberleutnant Klaus Becker sat in his Panther, scanning the autumn mist that hung over the rolling fields. His crew had survived North Africa, the Eastern Front, and now this slow retreat through France. They'd learned to fear many things: Allied fighter-bombers, the endless artillery, the jabos that turned roads into graveyards. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared them for what happened next. At 800 meters, Becker spotted the silhouette, another American tank destroyer, probably an M10, he thought. His crew had knocked out dozens. The 3-inch gun was respectable, but manageable. Keep the front toward the enemy, wait for the shot, return fire, standard procedure. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The American vehicle moved into position. Becker gave the order to fire. His gunner squeezed the trigger. The 75mm shell streaked toward the target, direct hit on the turret, but instead of the expected explosion, just sparks. The enemy vehicle didn't even slow down, and then it fired back. The sound was different, slightly louder, deeper. The muzzle flash, bigger than anything Becker had seen from American tank destroyers. The shell hit the Panther's frontal armor, 82mm of sloped steel, the pride of German engineering. It punched through like paper. Becker never knew what killed him. His Panther erupted in flames, ammunition cooking off in a series of explosions that scattered debris across a 50-meter radius. Of his crew of 5, only the radio operator survived, badly burned, stumbling from the wreck. He would later tell his interrogators something that confused American intelligence at first. He kept repeating the same phrase in broken English. Not like the others. Different gun. Much bigger gun. The Americans had just deployed their secret weapon, the 90mm gun motor carriage M36, and German tankers were about to learn a new kind of fear. By the autumn of 1944, the war in Western Europe had settled into a grinding, bloody affair. The breakout from Normandy was complete, Paris liberated. But at the German border, progress slowed to a crawl. The Allies faced the Siegfried Line, a network of concrete bunkers, Dragon's Teeth tank obstacles, and prepared defensive positions stretching hundreds of miles. And behind these fortifications waited the Panzer divisions, rebuilt, reinforced, armed with the most advanced tanks Germany had ever produced. The Panther medium tank had become the standard German battle tank by late 1944, with its long 75mm KWK-42 gun and sloped armor up to 85mm thick. It could engage American Shermans at ranges where return fire was ineffective. German tank commanders had learned a brutal arithmetic. Trade space for time. Use superior gun range. Make every American advance cost blood and steel. The Tiger, even more formidable, mounted the legendary 88mm gun behind armor up to 180mm thick on the turret front. A Tiger in a defensive position was nearly invincible from the front. American forces had relied primarily on the M10 tank destroyer, nicknamed the Wolverine. Built on the Sherman chassis with sloped armor, it mounted a 3-inch M7 gun. At the start of the war, this weapon was considered powerful. By 1944, it was obsolete. Sergeant Michael O'Connor of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion recalled the frustration. We'd hit a Panther from 500 yards, watch the shell bounce off. Then he'd turn his turret, and that was it. You had maybe 10 seconds to back up and find cover before his 75 tore you apart. The numbers told the story. In battles across France, in July and August of 1944, American tank destroyer battalions reported that the 3-inch gun could only reliably penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at ranges under 300 meters. Against a Tiger, even that was optimistic. At 300 meters, a German gunner rarely missed. The crisis had been building for months. After the disastrous Battle of Kasserine Pass in Tunisia in February 1943, where American forces suffered their first major defeat against German armor, military planners knew something had to change. The reports from North Africa were damning. German tanks could engage and destroy American armor at ranges where return fire was impossible. But The American military had a problem, not of capability, but of doctrine and politics. The United States Army had created the Tank Destroyer Force in 1941, based on a specific philosophy. Tanks were for breakthrough and exploitation. Tank destroyers were for defense, held in reserve to counter enemy armored thrusts. They needed to be fast, mobile, and hard-hitting. Heavy armor would slow them down, defeat their purpose. This doctrine made sense on paper. In practice, it meant American tank destroyer crews went into battle in lightly armored vehicles, relying on speed and ambush tactics. The problem was, the enemy refused to cooperate with American doctrine. German tanks didn't mass for dramatic breakthroughs. They fought from prepared positions. They used their superior gun range. They made mobility irrelevant by forcing Americans to attack fortified defenses. Back in the United States, engineers had already seen this coming. In late summer 1942, before American forces even encountered a Tiger in combat, weapon designers at the Ordnance Department began experimenting with a more powerful gun. The solution was sitting in plain sight. The United States Army Air Forces had developed an excellent 90mm anti-aircraft gun, the M1. High muzzle velocity, powerful shell, excellent accuracy. Someone asked the obvious question: could it kill tanks? In October 1942, engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland mounted an experimental 90mm T7 gun into the turret of an M10 tank destroyer. The fit was tight, the turret strained under the weight, but it worked. The gun could elevate, it could traverse, and when they test-fired it, the results were spectacular. A 90mm armor-piercing shell could penetrate 5 inches of armor at 1,000 yards. That was enough to defeat any German tank in service, including the Tiger. But there was a problem. Actually, several problems. General Andrew Bruce, head of the Tank Destroyer Force, objected to the entire project. He favored the M18 Hellcat, a much lighter and faster tank destroyer armed with a 76mm gun. Bruce believed in the original doctrine. Speed and mobility were everything. A heavier vehicle armed with a bigger gun violated the fundamental principles of tank destroyer warfare. The Army Ground Forces initially sided with Bruce. They argued that work was already underway to mount the 90mm gun on a new heavy tank, the T-26, which would become the M36 Pershing. Why waste resources on a tank destroyer when the solution was better tanks? It was a debate that would cost lives. Throughout 1943, the project languished. Engineers continued work at a slow pace, but without official support, production remained impossible. The T-71 prototype, as the 90mm gun motor carriage was designated, sat in testing facilities while American troops in Italy struggled against German armor with inadequate weapons. Then came Normandy. June 6, 1944. D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Within weeks, American forces were pushing inland, breaking out of the beachhead, driving toward Paris. The German response was immediate and violent. Panzer divisions counterattacked, trying to throw the Allies back into the sea. American tank destroyer battalions found themselves in desperate combat against Panthers and Tigers. The 3-inch gun of the M10 proved woefully inadequate. Tank destroyer crews developed tactics to survive. Aim for the tracks, aim for the thinner side armor, get close, impossibly close, and hope. Reports flooded back to Washington. The M10 was obsolete. The 76mm gun mounted on newer Shermans and the M18 Hellcat was better, but still insufficient against frontal armor. American forces needed more firepower. They needed it immediately. On July 29, 1944, with American forces still fighting in Normandy, the War Department dramatically increased the M36 contract from 300 vehicles to 1,400. Production would begin immediately. Every available M10A1 chassis would be converted. When those ran out, they'd use Sherman hulls. When those ran out, they'd use standard M10 hulls. The United States was about to commit industrial might to a weapon system that General Bruce still opposed. April 1944. Fisher Tank Arsenal, Grand Blanc, Michigan. The same facility that built Shermans and M10s received new blueprints. Engineers studied the specifications. The M36 would use the M10A1 chassis, powered by the reliable Ford GAA V8 engine, producing 500 horsepower, but the turret would be entirely new. The 90mm M3 gun weighed significantly more than the 3-inch gun. The M10's turret couldn't handle it. Engineers designed a new turret with curved sides instead of the M10's angular design. Power traverse was essential. Manual traverse alone couldn't move the heavy gun quickly enough. The most distinctive feature was the large bustle at the rear of the turret. This counterweight balanced the long gun barrel and also stored 11 rounds of 90mm ammunition. The turret's open-top design remained, keeping the vehicle relatively light at 31 tons compared to the M10's 29.5. Armor protection was identical to the M10. The frontal hull was sloped at 55 degrees with a maximum thickness of 108mm. The turret front was 76mm, the sides only 19mm. Like all American tank destroyers, the M30 sacrificed protection for mobility, but it was the gun that mattered. The 90mm M3 could fire 5 types of ammunition. The M82 armor-piercing capped shell was the standard anti-tank round. It could penetrate 129mm of armor, angled at 30 degrees, from vertical at 500 yards. At 1,000 yards, still 122mm. For comparison, the Panther's frontal armor was 85mm at 55 degrees. The Tiger's frontal hull was 100mm at 9 degrees. Both were vulnerable to the M36 at normal combat ranges. More importantly, the 90mm gun produced significantly less smoke than the 3-inch gun when fired. M10 crews had complained that their position was immediately revealed by the massive muzzle blast and smoke cloud. The M36's muzzle signature, while still substantial, was reduced. Tank destroyers might actually survive long enough to fire a second shot. Production began in April 1944, but bureaucratic delays meant the first vehicles didn't reach conversion facilities until June. The Fisher Tank Arsenal led production. The American Locomotive Company in Schenectady, New York, began converting M10A1 hulls. Massey Harris joined production later. Each vehicle required approximately 150 hours of labor to convert from M10 to M36. Skilled workers removed the old turret, modified the turret ring, installed the new turret with its power traverse system, fitted the 90mm gun, installed the counterweight bustle, adjusted the suspension for the additional weight, and tested every system. Quality control was strict. Every gun was test-fired. Every vehicle underwent a shakedown run. Any mechanical issues were corrected before the vehicle was marked ready for shipment. By the end of July 1944, 40 M36 were ready. They were crated, loaded onto ships, and sent to France. They arrived in September. Training would begin immediately. The men selected to crew the M36 came from existing tank destroyer battalions, units that had been fighting with M10s since the landings in Normandy. They were experienced, battle-hardened, and skeptical. Staff Sergeant William O'Brien of the 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion recalled his first impression. "They told us we were getting new vehicles, better guns. I figured it would be another incremental improvement. Then I saw the 90mm. That barrel was huge. It looked like something you'd use to shoot down bombers." Training focused on the gun. The 90mm had more recoil than the 3-inch. Crews had to learn new loading procedures. The shells were heavier, more awkward. The rate of fire would be slower. But the penetration power was extraordinary. During training exercises in France, crews fired at captured German tanks. A Panther was positioned at 1,500 yards. The first shot from the 90mm M3 struck the turret. The shell punched through, detonating inside. The entire turret was blown off the hull, landing 30 feet away. The Americans had finally achieved what they needed: gun parity. At range, an M36 could kill a Panther or Tiger before those vehicles could close to their preferred engagement distance. Tank destroyer doctrine could finally work as intended. Ambush, fire, displace, survive. October 1944. The 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion became the first unit to take M36's into combat. They were attached to the 44th Infantry Division, preparing for operations around Luneville, France. The Germans controlled high ground overlooking the Meurthe River Valley. Panzer units, including elements of the 11th Panzer Division, held prepared positions. American infantry attacks had stalled under heavy fire. Tank destroyers were needed to provide direct fire support. On October 30th, the 776th received their orders: support the infantry assault, destroy enemy armor, eliminate fortified positions. The M36's moved forward in the pre-dawn darkness. 4 vehicles from Company A took positions on a ridgeline overlooking the German lines. At 600 meters, they had clear fields of fire. At 0630 hours, the infantry assault began. German positions immediately returned fire. Machine guns, mortars, and then, emerging from camouflaged positions, 3 Panthers. The German tanks opened fire on American infantry. 75mm high explosive shells carved bloody gaps in the advancing lines. The attack faltered. Men went to ground, pinned by the Panthers' guns. Lieutenant James Morrison, commanding the lead M36, gave the order. Gunner, tank 11 o'clock, 800. His gunner, Corporal David Chen, traversed the turret. The power traverse made it smooth, steady. The crosshairs settled on the Panther's turret. Identified. Fire. The 90mm gun roared. The muzzle brake directed blast to the sides, reducing the massive recoil. Inside the turret, the spent shell casing ejected, clanging against the turret wall. The loader, Private Robert Williams, already had the next round ready. 800 meters away, the German Panther's turret erupted in sparks. The 90mm armor-piercing shell penetrated the 80mm of turret armor. Inside, the shell's explosive filler detonated. The crew never knew what happened. The Panther stopped moving. Smoke poured from the turret hatches. The second Panther, alerted by the explosion, began to traverse its turret toward the American position. Its commander had seen the muzzle flash, knew the direction of the threat, but Morrison's M36 fired again. The second shot struck the Panther's gun mantlet. The gun ended the junction where the gun barrel entered the turret. The shell penetrated, tore through internal equipment, killed the gunner and loader. 2 Panthers destroyed in 45 seconds. The third Panther retreated, backing rapidly into cover before the M36 could acquire it as a target. Its commander had learned a critical lesson. The Americans had a new weapon, and it was deadly. The infantry assault resumed. With the Panthers suppressed, American troops advanced through the German positions. By noon, the ridge was secured. That evening, American intelligence officers examined the destroyed Panthers. Both vehicles had been penetrated through armor that should have been proof against any existing American tank or tank destroyer gun. The implications were immediately clear. The M36 worked. It worked extraordinarily well. Word spread quickly through American units. The new 90mm tank destroyers were lethal. More battalions requested immediate conversion from M10s to M36's, but production couldn't keep pace with demand. By December 1st, 1944, only 236 M36 were in combat in Europe. It wasn't enough. The Germans were about to launch their last great offensive in the West, and when they did, those 236 M36 would be critical to stopping them. December 16th, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium, 0530 hours, temperature minus 15 degrees Celsius, fog thick enough to cut with a knife. Sergeant Robert Malloy of the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion woke to the sound of artillery. Not unusual on the Western Front. What was unusual was the scale. Hundreds of guns, maybe thousands. The entire forest seemed to shake. Then came the radio calls. German breakthrough. Massive armored columns. Infantry. Divisions. Collapsing. Retreat orders issued, then countermanded, then issued again in confusion. Operation Wacht am Rhein. Hitler's last gamble. 28 divisions, including 10 Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions, smashing through the thinly held American lines in the Ardennes. The objective: split the Allied armies, capture the port of Antwerp, force a negotiated peace. Leading the assault were over 400 tanks, Panthers, Tigers, and the newest terror, the Königstiger, the King Tiger, 70 tons of armor, a long 88mm gun that could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, frontal armor 180mm thick, effectively impervious to most Allied weapons. The initial German assault achieved complete surprise. Entire American regiments were surrounded, captured, or scattered. By December 17th, German spearheads had penetrated 20 kilometers into Allied lines. Panic spread through command posts. Were the Germans breaking through to the coast? Would the Normandy gains be lost? Into this chaos, American commanders threw everything available: infantry reserves, tank battalions, artillery, and tank destroyer units, including 3 battalions equipped with the M36, the 610th, the 703rd, and the 740th. These units would prove decisive. December 20th, the town of Wehrmacht, Belgium. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 82nd Airborne Division, took defensive positions on key roads leading west. Their mission was simple and nearly impossible: hold the line, stop the German advance, die if necessary, but buy time for reinforcements. Staff Sergeant Charles Morrison commanded an M36 designated Cobra. His crew had been together since Normandy: driver Private James Kelly, gunner Corporal Anthony Delicio, loader Private First Class Robert Nash, assistant driver and bow machine gunner Private Michael O'Donnell. They positioned their vehicle in a hull-down position overlooking a crossroads. The 90mm gun covered 300 meters of road. Behind them, paratroopers dug foxholes in the frozen ground. At 1400 hours, the Germans came. First, reconnaissance. Armored cars probing American positions. Morrison held fire. Let them come closer. Let them commit. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Then the main force. Panthers, at least 6, advancing in a column with supporting infantry. Morrison counted quickly. 6 Panthers, 4 M36 in his platoon. Not good odds, but they had one advantage: the Germans didn't know what they were facing. The lead Panther entered the kill zone. Morrison gave the order. All 4 M36's fired simultaneously, 4 90mm shells at ranges between 400 and 600 meters. 3 Panthers erupted in flames immediately. The 4th took a hit to the tracks, immobilizing it. Its turret began to traverse, searching for targets. Delicio was already loading the second round. Morrison's M36 fired again. The shell struck the damaged Panther's turret side, penetrating the 50mm of armor. The tank exploded, ammunition detonating in a fireball that consumed the vehicle. The remaining 2 Panthers retreated rapidly, backing around a curve in the road, using buildings for cover. But they'd seen enough. The Americans had a weapon that could kill Panthers frontally, at range, with first-shot effectiveness. That engagement lasted 3 minutes. 4 Panthers destroyed, 1 damaged, 0 American losses. But it was just the beginning. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. For the next week, the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion fought continuously. German armor probed their positions. Each time, the M36's engaged at maximum range. Each time, German tanks burned. The psychological effect on German tank crews was profound. Lieutenant Heinrich Weber, a Panther commander captured on December 23rd, told his interrogators, "We couldn't understand it. Our intelligence said the Americans only had 3-inch guns and 76mm guns, both weak against our frontal armor. But these new vehicles, they killed us from distances where we thought we were safe. The sound of that gun, you could hear it, was different, deeper, more powerful. When you heard that sound, you knew someone was dying." The M36 effectiveness wasn't just about penetration. It was about range, accuracy, and the psychological impact of sudden, catastrophic destruction. German tank doctrine in 1944 emphasized using superior gun range to engage enemies before they could return effective fire. Panthers could kill Shermans at 1,500 meters. At that range, the Sherman's 75mm gun was nearly useless against frontal armor. Even the improved 76mm gun struggled past 1,000 meters. The M36 changed that equation completely. Its 90mm gun matched Panther performance. German tankers could no longer rely on standing off and picking apart American armor from safe distances. Every engagement became potentially lethal. Near Malmedy, on December 22nd, Corporal Anthony Pinto of an M36 crew achieved what would become one of the most remarkable kills of the entire war. A German Panther was spotted at extreme range, positioned on high ground, firing at American infantry positions. Pinto calculated the range, 4,200 yards, over 2 miles, at the absolute limit of his telescopic sight's capability. The standard doctrine was, don't engage past 1,500 yards. But the Panther was slaughtering infantry. Pinto had to try. He elevated the gun to maximum range, adjusted for wind, compensated for the target's elevation, fired. 15 seconds later, the shell struck. The Panther's turret roof, the weakest point, only 40 millimeters thick. The shell punched through. The tank exploded. 4,200 yards. A kill at a range where most tank guns couldn't even reach the target. American intelligence carefully documented the engagement, measuring the distance multiple times. It stood as one of the longest-range tank kills of World War II. 3 days later, another remarkable engagement. Lieutenant Alfred Rose of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion scored a kill against a Panther at 4,600 yards, slightly exceeding Pinto's record. These extreme-range kills were exceptional, celebrated because of their difficulty, but they demonstrated the M36's capability. In the hands of a skilled crew, the 90mm gun could reach out and kill German armor at distances the enemy thought were absolutely safe. German tactical doctrine began to change. Orders went out to panzer units. The Americans have a new tank destroyer, 90mm gun, extremely dangerous. Do not engage at range. Close quickly. Use maneuver. Attack from multiple directions, but closing quickly meant exposing thinner side armor. And American M36 crews had learned to work in teams. One vehicle would engage frontally, forcing the German tank to orient toward the threat. Another M36 would flank, hitting the vulnerable sides. The 610th Tank Destroyer Battalion, fighting near Bastogne, developed this tactic to perfection. Captain Duchossois, commanding Company B, described the technique. We worked in teams of 3. 2 M36's and 1 platoon of infantry. The infantry would identify the target, give us the location. The first M36 would engage to get the German's attention while he's traversing to face the threat. The second M36 moves to a flanking position. Panthers have 50 millimeters of side armor. Our 90mm punched through like it wasn't there. By December 24th, American tank destroyer battalions in the Ardennes had claimed over 100 German tanks destroyed. The actual number was certainly lower, as battlefield overclaiming was common in the chaos of combat. But even conservative estimates put the number at 60 to 70 confirmed kills. The Germans were learning a brutal lesson. American tank destroyers were no longer easy targets. The hunters had become the hunted. December 26th, the weather cleared. Allied air power returned with devastating effect. Fighter bombers swarmed over German columns, destroying vehicles trapped on narrow forest roads. The German advance stalled. American reinforcements, including Patton's Third Army from the south, began counterattacking. The Battle of the Bulge entered its final phase. The Germans were now fighting to escape the trap, to withdraw back to the Siegfried Line, before Allied forces encircled them. And everywhere they went, M36's were waiting. Near Houffalize, on January 9th, 1945, the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged a German column attempting to retreat. 6 Panthers 4 Panzer IV medium tanks, and supporting infantry. The engagement lasted 18 minutes. When it ended, all 6 Panthers were burning hulks, 3 Panzer IVs destroyed, 1 abandoned by its crew. American losses: 1 M36 damaged by track hit, repaired within hours. The crew of that engagement's lead M36, commanded by Sergeant William Hendricks, received a unit commendation. The citation noted, "Through superior gunnery and aggressive action, this crew destroyed 3 enemy tanks and contributed to the destruction of 3 others, demonstrating the effectiveness of American equipment and training." But the citation didn't mention the real story. Hendricks had nightmares for months afterward, not from fear of death, but from what he'd witnessed through his commander's periscope. The German crews burning alive in their tanks, men scrambling from hatches, uniforms on fire, the screams carried across frozen fields. War had become industrial murder. The M36 was extraordinarily good at it. By early February 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over. German casualties exceeded 100,000 men. Tank losses were catastrophic. Over 600 armored vehicles destroyed or abandoned. The Wehrmacht would never again mass armor on the Western Front. American tank destroyer battalions claimed a significant portion of those kills. The after-action report from the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion stated, "The 90mm gun proved capable of defeating all enemy armor encountered. The M36 tank destroyer demonstrated superior performance and reliability. Crew morale is excellent." Crew morale was indeed high. For the first time since Normandy, American tank destroyer crews felt they had a weapon that gave them better than even odds against German armor. The psychological burden of going into battle in an undergunned vehicle was gone. German prisoners told a different story. Gefreiter Otto Reinhardt, captured near St. Vith, was a Panther driver with 6 months combat experience. During interrogation, he said, "The 90mm, we called it the Todesglock, the death bell. You would hear that sound, that deep boom, and you knew a Panther just died, sometimes your own. We feared it more than the Yabos, more than artillery. Because artillery kills randomly. The 90mm, it hunted us specifically. It was personal." The psychological impact of the M36 on German tank crews cannot be overstated. For years, German tankers had enjoyed technical superiority. Their guns outranged Allied weapons. Their armor was thicker. They could engage with confidence, knowing that frontal hits were unlikely to penetrate. The M36 shattered that confidence. Suddenly, every engagement was deadly. The Americans had achieved gun parity. German tanks were no longer invincible fortresses, they were targets. This psychological shift affected German tactical decisions. Tank commanders became more cautious, less willing to expose their vehicles. Aggressive maneuvers decreased. Defensive positioning increased. The Panzer Force, which had always depended on speed and shock action, became conservative. American commanders noticed. General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, wrote in February 1945, "The M36 has proven to be the most effective anti-tank weapon in our inventory. Its 90mm gun gives our forces parity with German armor. For the first time in this campaign, I strongly recommend all tank destroyer battalions be re-equipped with this vehicle at the earliest opportunity." But there was a problem. Production couldn't keep pace with demand. By February 1945, approximately 1,000 M36 had been built, including all variants. That wasn't enough to re-equip every tank destroyer battalion. Many units continued fighting with M10s, or the faster M18 Hellcat with its 76mm gun. To address the shortage, 2 expedient variants were created. The M36B1 used a standard M4A3 Sherman hull with the M36 turret installed. This version had better automotive characteristics than the M10-based M36, and its Sherman hull offered slightly better armor protection. 187 M36B1s were built between October and December 1944. The M36B2 used standard M10 hulls instead of the improved M10A1. These vehicles also received upgraded features, including folding armored panels that could partially cover the open turret top, protecting against artillery airbursts and hand grenades. Several hundred M36B2s were completed in early 1945. All variants shared the critical component, the 90mm gun, and all were equally deadly against German armor. March 1945. Operation Plunder. The Allied crossing of the Rhine River, the last major water barrier protecting Germany's industrial heartland. American, British, and Canadian forces prepared massive assault crossings at multiple points along the river. Tank destroyer battalions, including those equipped with M36's, were essential to the operation. They would provide direct fire support for infantry crossing in boats, suppress German defensive positions, and engage any armor that appeared. The 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which had been first to take the M36 into combat back in October, was attached to the 63rd Infantry Division for the assault near Ensheim, just south of Saarbrücken. This sector of the Siegfried Line was particularly well fortified. Concrete bunkers with interlocking fields of fire, Dragon's Teeth tank obstacles, minefields, and German troops who knew this was their last chance to defend the fatherland. On March 17th, at 0500 hours, the American assault began. Artillery pounded German positions, infantry moved forward in the pre-dawn darkness, and M36's of Companies A and C moved into direct fire positions. For the next 60 hours, the tank destroyers fired continuously, not at tanks. There were few German armored vehicles remaining in this sector, but at bunkers. The 90mm high explosive shells were devastatingly effective against reinforced concrete. Each direct hit created enormous craters, collapsed walls, buried defenders under rubble. The battalion's after-action report noted, M36's fired 2,450 rounds of 90mm ammunition at fortifications. Every vehicle suffered damage from return fire. 3 total losses, 2 killed, 11 wounded. But the infantry advanced successfully. Staff Sergeant William Nichols, whose M36 took 17 hits from various weapons during the engagement, later said, "We were basically bunker busters. The 90mm could put a hole in concrete that would take out a whole firing position. And we'd fire, they'd fire back with everything they had. Artillery, rockets, Panzerfausts, direct-at gunfire. My vehicle was hit so many times I lost count. But that armor held, and we kept shooting until the infantry told us to stop because there was nothing left to shoot at." By March 19th, the Siegfried Line defenses in that sector were broken. The infantry had advanced through. Engineers were clearing obstacles. The road into Germany was open. The M36 had proven itself in yet another role, not just as a tank killer, but as a direct fire support weapon capable of reducing the heaviest fortifications. April 1945. The war was entering its final weeks. German resistance was collapsing. Allied armies were deep into Germany, advancing on multiple fronts. But there were still pockets of fierce fighting, particularly around cities where SS units or fanatical Hitler youth fought to the last man. Near Freihaldenhoven, the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion encountered one of the war's most formidable vehicles, a Königstiger, a King Tiger, 70 tons, 180mm of frontal armor, a long 88mm gun that could destroy any Allied tank at extreme range. The M36 that engaged it was commanded by Lieutenant Robert Carson. His gunner spotted the massive tank at 1,000 yards, positioned behind rubble that provided partial cover. Carson knew the statistics. Testing done by the 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion back in December had concluded that the 90mm gun could not penetrate the King Tiger's frontal armor at any practical range with standard ammunition. The only option was side or rear shots. But Carson's gunner had a different idea. The King Tiger's turret sides were only 80mm thick, much more vulnerable than the frontal armor, and the massive vehicle was oriented at a slight angle, exposing perhaps 30 degrees of turret side. The gunner fired 1,000 yards. The 90mm shell struck the junction where the King Tiger's turret met the hull, the weakest point in the armor scheme, where differently angled plates created a gap in protection. The shell penetrated. Inside, the King Tiger's ammunition detonated. The explosion was so violent it blew the turret completely off the hull. 70 tons of German steel reduced to burning wreckage in seconds. American intelligence carefully documented the kill. A King Tiger destroyed by an M36. It was proof that with proper tactics and skilled gunnery, even Germany's most heavily armored vehicles were vulnerable. But not every engagement ended so well. The M36, for all its firepower, had one critical weakness that crews learned to hate: the open-topped turret. Like all American tank destroyers, the M36 had no overhead armor. The turret was open to the sky. This design saved weight and provided excellent visibility and ventilation, but it made the vehicle extremely vulnerable to artillery airbursts, hand grenades, and infantry attacks from elevated positions. During urban combat, German infantry learned to target M36's with Panzerfausts fired from upper-story windows. The rocket would detonate inside the open turret, killing or wounding the entire crew. Staff Sergeant Michael O'Hara of the 808th Tank Destroyer Battalion described the terror. "You be moving through a town, everything seems quiet. Then boom, a Panzerfaust comes from above, drops right into your turret. You have maybe 2 seconds before it detonates. If you're lucky, you get out. If not, well, we learned to improvise. Some crews welded metal sheets over part of the turret opening. Others stretched canvas or shelter halves, anything to keep grenades from dropping in. None of it was really effective." The Army developed a folding armored roof kit for the M36 in early 1945, but few vehicles received it before the war ended. Most crews continued fighting with open turrets, accepting the vulnerability as the price for the 90mm guns' devastating firepower. Final casualties for M36 crews were significant. Of the approximately 1,770 M36s produced during the war, records indicate over 300 were completely destroyed in combat. Several hundred more were damaged and repaired. Crew casualties were harder to track precisely, but estimates suggest around 400 killed and over 800 wounded among M36 crews during the war's final 8 months. High casualty rates, but significantly lower than M10 crews, had suffered earlier in the war. The superior firepower meant engagements were shorter, giving the enemy less time to return effective fire. May 7th, 1945. Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. American tank destroyer battalions assembled at collection points across Germany. Vehicle inspections began. Damage assessments, decisions about what to keep, what to scrap, what to ship to the Pacific for the planned invasion of Japan. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's M36 gathered near Leipzig. These vehicles had fought from Normandy through the Bulge to Germany's heartland. Their armor bore the scars, dents from near misses, penetration marks that hadn't quite broken through, scratches from tree branches during forest fighting. Sergeant Morrison's vehicle, Cobra, had survived the entire war. Its armor showed 41 separate impact marks. Not one had penetrated. The crew had changed 3 times as men were killed, wounded, or rotated out. But the vehicle endured. Morrison walked around it one last time, ran his hand over the 90mm gun barrel. This weapon had saved his life dozens of times, had killed God knows how many German tankers, men who probably hadn't wanted to be there any more than Morrison did, men with families, hopes, dreams, all ended by 90mm of American steel traveling at 2,800 feet per second. He tried not to think about it, tried to focus on survival, on going home, on the future. But the faces haunted him. German tankers he'd seen burning, the screams, the smell of cooking flesh that permeated every battlefield where armor fought. The M36 was extraordinarily effective at killing, perhaps too effective. War had become too efficient, too industrial, too capable of turning human beings into carbonized remains in seconds. Morrison never spoke about it to his family, came home, married his sweetheart, got a job, had kids, lived a normal life, but sometimes, late at night, he'd wake up hearing that sound, the deep boom of the 90mm gun, and he'd remember. The M36's combat record was remarkable by any measure. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with the M36 claimed over 1,300 German tanks and assault guns destroyed during the war's final 8 months. Historians debate the exact numbers. Battlefield overclaiming was endemic in World War II, but even conservative estimates put confirmed kills at 800 to 900 vehicles. The average M36-equipped battalion claimed 34 enemy tanks destroyed, along with 17 pillboxes, 16 machine gun nests, and 24 miscellaneous vehicles. The best-performing battalion claimed 105 German tank kills, though this number almost certainly included vehicles destroyed by other weapons and mistakenly attributed to the battalion. What's not debatable is the weapon's effectiveness. The 90mm gun could defeat any German tank in service at normal combat ranges. Panthers, Tigers, even the mighty King Tiger were all vulnerable. German tactical doctrine, which relied on superior gun range and armor protection, was negated. The psychological impact on German tank crews was profound and lasting. Post-war interviews with Wehrmacht veterans consistently mentioned the American 90mm gun as one of the most feared weapons of the war. More than the Firefly's 17-pounder, more than Soviet 85mm and 100mm guns, the M36's 90mm had a reputation. Oberst Hans von Luck, a veteran panzer commander who fought from North Africa through Normandy to Germany, wrote in his memoir, "The American 90mm was the sound of death. When you heard that gun, you knew someone wasn't going home. Often it was us. The Americans had finally built a weapon that matched our best tanks, and they had it in quantity. By 1945, we knew we were beaten. The 90mm proved it every day." But the M36's story didn't end in 1945. The vehicle continued in service for decades, fighting in multiple wars on several continents. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953. American and South Korean forces used M36's extensively against North Korean and Chinese armor. The 90mm gun easily defeated Soviet T-34-85 tanks at all ranges. During the Battle of White Horse in October 1952, M36 of the 53rd Tank Company provided direct fire support that helped repel massive Chinese infantry assaults, claiming 300 enemy casualties. Pakistan acquired M36B2s in the 1950s, using them in the Indo-Pakistani Wars of 1965 and 1971. Despite mechanical problems, the vehicles scored notable kills against Indian Centurion tanks. France deployed M36s in Indochina during the First Indochina War. The vehicles provided fire support during numerous engagements against Viet Minh forces. Yugoslavia received hundreds of M36 after World War II, re-engining many with Soviet diesel engines. These vehicles remained in service into the 1990s, seeing combat during the Yugoslav wars. Serbian forces used M36 during the conflicts in Bosnia and Kosovo, proving that a 50-year-old design could still be effective against modern light armor and fortifications. The Republic of China Army in Taiwan operated M36s until at least 2001, making it one of the longest-serving armored vehicles in history, over 55 years from first combat to final retirement. Today, only a handful of M36 survive in museums and private collections. These scarred veterans sit silently, their 90mm guns pointing at nothing, their open turrets exposed to rain and sun instead of artillery and grenades. But for 8 months, in 1944 and 45, they were the most feared tank killers on the Western Front. The vehicle that gave American forces parity with German armor, the weapon that could reach out across 1,000 yards and turn a 70-ton Tiger into a burning coffin. German tankers learned to recognize the sound. That deep, thunderous boom, different from the Shermans. 75mm deeper than the M10's 3-inch gun. Unmistakable, unforgettable, the sound of the 90mm, the sound they feared more than artillery fire itself, because artillery was random, impersonal. You might survive, you might not, but the 90mm was aimed, deliberate. If you heard it, someone had already died, and it might be you. Veteran tanker Klaus Becker's brother, who survived the war, later wrote about his sibling's death near Luneville. Klaus was killed by the first 90mm he encountered. He never knew what hit him. Perhaps that was mercy. Others weren't so lucky. They heard that sound again and again, knowing each time it could be their turn. They fought on because they had to, but they were terrified, not of dying. Soldiers accept that risk, but of that specific death, trapped in a burning tank, knowing you're about to die, helpless. That's what the 90mm meant to us. That's why we feared it. The M36 was not perfect. Its armor was thin. Its open turret was vulnerable. It was slower than the M18 Hellcat. It couldn't match the M26 Pershing's all-around protection. Production came too late to make a strategic difference. The war was already won before the M36 arrived in significant numbers. But tactically, at the small unit level, where men fought and died, the M36 was exactly what American forces needed. A weapon that could kill German armor at range. A gun that gave tank destroyer crews confidence. A vehicle that shifted the psychological balance from the Germans to the Americans. For the Wehrmacht tankers who faced it, the M36's 90mm gun represented the end of German technical superiority. They had lost the war of innovation, the race for better weapons, the ability to field superior equipment. American industrial might had produced a weapon system that matched German quality while maintaining the quantitative advantage. The war had become unwinnable. The 90mm proved it. Every time that gun fired, every time a Panther or Tiger erupted in flames, German tankers were reminded they were fighting a losing war, and the Americans had the weapons to finish it. Now, thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.